for them to sign.
Okay. So do you want to go to,
So we thought we would, last week, we always try to layer the next week a bit of what we covered in the previous week. And last week, we just really did overview
or do you want to do,
based on what,
I can do a screen share of this.
not yet, no, we'll save
Okay.
this for when it kind of comes up. But we'll do an overview of the overview to get started.
Okay. And I'm looking to see,
And then we'll see how much time is left
we have this.
for a deeper dive into this kind of thing. But so we're redoing
Here it is.
the
Here it
syllabus
is.
now as we speak. So you're part of that process. We established it, what year was it? 2021?
2020.
2020?
Oh, wait.
I thought it was
No,
2020.
no, we did it in, this is the 4th year, and this is 20, we're starting 2020, so we did it in 2020, yeah. We started in the fall of 2020, so that was in the peak COVID.
Okay. October 7th, so happy anniversary.
Yeah.
And this painting we could talk a little bit about.
Yeah, let's do that.
And there's the logo. So we first formed it under the auspices or with cooperation with the Unitarian Church. And then we took it outside of there, and that was interesting. And now we're bringing it back under their umbrella, which is interesting again. And it morphs every time we redo it. So it's been a really interesting creative process. And we could all introduce ourselves. Bruce is a very deep Buddhist. He's been involved in study and practice for decades. And his twin brother was a friend and colleague of Bart's, and they collaborated together on these thought experiments. And Bruce was also a physicist. Bruce is Bruce. His brother Ron was also a Buddhist monk, a full monk. Bruce, you're virtually a monk, but is it just like a matter of a certain initiation that you haven't received? That
Well, what does it mean to be a monk, Bruce?
Well, there's certain precepts, and of course, there was a ceremony with our teacher.
that
So-
Ron underwent and you have not?
Yeah, I wasn't there.
But are you a monk?
No,
So what's the reason for wanting to become a monk?
well, at the beginning, he wanted to go into retreat, I think, in the East. I can't remember, to be honest.
But that was how many
Yeah.
years ago when he did that? He took the vows, and
Oh, it's quite a long time ago.
Oh, it was in
was it like 50 years?
the 70s or the 80s. I don't know. It was long. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And yeah, he'd separated from his wife. They got a divorce eventually.
In order to do this, or was that happening
Yeah,
anyway?
yeah, I said, yeah. Well, he definitely had something deeper in mind. I think he wanted to go into a serious retreat of some kind, but that didn't turn out. So,
And he became a physics teacher.
well, he taught physics in high school, and he was quite good at it, apparently. Yeah.
So until he passed over, he and Bart would work very intimately. Bart's training is really as a mathematician, but he's also functioned essentially as a physicist. He has
Right.
a PhD from MIT and worked for many years at Bell Labs. And
Well, one thing that happened with Bart and Ron was that Bart gave him some guidelines of what to look for. And of course, Ron went and had a look and came up with some observations, So it was a very good, working relationship.
Yeah, I mean, when you do experimental things like Ron was doing with gathering all of this data and so forth, you can really accelerate by having a framework, by having a preconception about what to look for. So,
Right.
like one of the things that I pointed out to Ron, he was spending all this time looking at the when the big bounce occurred, when the universe that we're in right now in this cycle formed. And I said, you should be looking for this Higgs boson. And, because the nature of the bounce was that the Higgs boson is an entity. It's a boson, a particle. It has the name of a particle, but not really. This is what's terrible about Western physics. They pick these names and they last forever, but they're wrong. So anyway, the Higgs boson
such as Big Bang.
is a scalar. Okay, so it simply is a constant that goes throughout the entire universe. Okay, and in 2012, the CERN activity discovered the Higgs boson by smashing enough particles together, and they could see where it resonated, and it did require the CERN. It's called Big Hadron Accelerator to find this thing. But the point in this is that everything scales off of the mass of the Higgs boson. So the mass of the electron, the proton, the neutron, every single particle, the neutrino, you name it, it's all, the mass is all multiplied by the mass, by the value of the Higgs boson. It's a scalar that shows up everywhere. And this is when you have the bounce occurring initially, the Higgs boson takes on a value of 0. So there's no mass anywhere. There's no nothing.
That's what the
and
universe
everything is just crunched together. Okay. But then all of a sudden the Higgs boson breaks out, and you end up with actually two types of Higgs bosons, one for matter and one for dark matter. And voila, both of these things kick into overdrive, and all of these particles and everything else come into existence. Okay. And it was a great discovery. I couldn't believe that he could find it. Okay. I encouraged him to look for it, but I didn't think he'd find it because, what are you looking for? I told him what to look for, but I didn't really think he would succeed.
Do we have
and so forth? Why don't you go back up and let's go back to the cover and explain what's on our cover of our syllabus.
Okay.
So, only how do we do that? That thing's got to move
here.
Okay, so here we have this esoteric.
This is the first one.
Yeah, this is on the cover of the syllabus, and it's also on the cover on the homepage of the Aleph Talks website.
So this is the third recurrence of it. This is the third anniversary, but we haven't done it.
We've done it 3 years. This is the start of year 4. It's just like saying you're 10. Well, if you're 10, you've completed 10 years on Earth, and you're in your 11th year.
Well, here's 20 to 21 is 1, and 21 to 22 is 2.
Right.
So 22 to 23 was last year.
Right, it was 3 years.
So this is the beginning
of
another
the fourth year.
Okay.
Right, that's what I said.
Okay, I have to do it
Okay.
that way.
Okay, so this is a painting that's an abstraction of the tree of life of the Kabbalah. So the Kabbalah has as we'll see, 10 nodes, 10 Sephiroths to it. And the 10 Sephiroths were abstracted by this painter to show, if you see, there's 10 horizontal lines. And then there's kind of this lightning bolt. I don't know what it is.
I love the way he
You know,
captured
that, yeah, I mean, you know, that lightning connecting the thing at the top and the thing at the bottom.
And then there's this rebirthing butterfly down there.
Right. And what's at the top? He's got like a trinity there. He's got
Right.
two
Those are
circles
the-
with an intersection.
Those are called the supernals of the Sephirot of the
Well, that's
trio.
right. Yeah, there's three. The 10 are broken out into 7 and 3. I left that out.
Right. So those are the upper, they're the most universal. And it's almost showing like the step down unit of how they perceive of the creative process. And it's really amazing if you look at the story of Genesis with this model. And they're talking, it's really like spiritual physics, what they're talking about. I studied this for a few years in New York, and it was just mind-blowing. It was just the most beautiful brain candy I've ever seen. And so I walked into this gallery in Vermont. I was in Vermont because my intuition told me in the spring of 2001 to get out of New York. I lived within sight of the Twin Towers. I could see them out of my living room window, and something was just saying, get out of Dodge, bring your books and your cats and get out of Dodge. So I was in Vermont when it happened. But I saw this painting in a gallery. It's huge. I turned a corner and there it was, and it's completely overpowering. You know, it's like, you know, really, really
Floor to
tall.
ceiling. Yeah.
And I was just like kind of, you know, cowering back. And something in me just said, my God, that's Kabbalah. That is Kabbalah. I don't know how I knew it. It was completely instinctive and intuitive. And then I stood there and I counted the bars. And I said, yeah, that is totally Kabbalah. And then I turned and looked through the gallery, and he had all kinds of amazing art on all kinds of other symbolism. It's a beautiful portrait of Mary Magdalene. And he's a Buddhist. He's a practicing Buddhist.
They're very spiritual.
Bruce zooms in from Toronto, and that's where this guy is from. And where does he live in this?
He lives
the
in
South,
over in Virginia toward the coast, the
right?
southeastern corner of Virginia, which is the boonies.
They barely have internet there. We had him do a segment, but it had to be taped in advance and then played. And then he came in, I think, just on the phone, so we could talk with him. But I would love to have him at the church in Westport with his artwork and give a talk about his process. It was really exciting for me to meet him, like, 15 years later, at least on the phone. And he's still painting. He's doing all kinds of amazing things. And he's given us permission to use this image. It's kind of like our calling card.
Yeah.
For the class.
Yeah, the deep mystics of the Kabbalah are way ahead of modern Western physicists in terms of what they've actually observed. So Ron Cowan would be an example of this.
Right.
That he observed far beyond, what. There's a reason why there's 10 here. We'll come back to it, and you'll see.
But
you talked about the divine feminine, and it was interesting. We learned from the rabbi the other day that, Adonai, and in the Jewish faith, the concept of who the divine is above male or female.
Absolutely. It's above polarity of any kind or duality.
And there you have it.
There it is. And
Well,
then we start to have this process of separation.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence
and
that
duality.
the Torah was rewritten to write out the roles of women.
Of course.
Deliberately, okay?
Right.
It's not an accident.
And in Kabbalah, that one of my favorite concepts is that the real divine spark is the Shekinah, and that's hidden. And when the universe shattered at one point in the creative process, that real divine essence is disguised. It's hidden behind the cloak of physical reality. And part of our job in tikkun of healing the universe, of mending the break, is to raise her. And that's really like what's behind the Sabbath. And something I love is that you do it with 2 candles, not just one, because you're actually celebrating the duality. Even though you know it's an illusion, you agree with the Buddhists about that, but you're saying, but viva la différence, and viva the delusion of the duality, because that's where all the play happens. Otherwise, it's just one big jar of mayonnaise, of oneness. And it's in the separation that the interplay happens and that love can happen. You need at least the illusion of an other and a self to have the flow of love. Otherwise, it's just this solipsism,
So just in the same vein, since we're on this,
So we have a link to his
there's
website.
a great deal of evidence that Jesus of Nazareth went out and recruited women as well as men as disciples. Now, the men that he recruited were basically fishermen, so one would have to think they were illiterate. Most people couldn't read or write in that era. However, the women that he recruited, starting with Mary Magdalene, were really high-powered women. And, this would never do for the Catholic Church. So they were written out of everything. However, there's an instance where Peter, this is in these recently discovered since 1945, these lost gospels that have been discovered, where Peter goes and he asks Mary Magdalene, well, you're spending all this time with him, what is he teaching you? And she starts to explain to him what Jesus of Nazareth is teaching them. And Mary Magdalene is very high powered, very capable, and
Extremely educated.
And Peter goes, well, we never learned any of this stuff. What are you talking about? And basically that Jesus of Nazareth chose in order to package everything for the largely illiterate audience, he came up with the notion of parables, of stories that were very catchy and people could pass them down word of mouth from generation to generation. But the really meaty stuff he kept with his group of women disciples. And in fact, it appears that this was written into what was called the Book of Joy, or the Path of Joy. And it showed up in particular in southern France in the 1100 AD timeframe with the
Chartres Cathedral, by the way.
No, southern France. This is down in the.
But that's the same era, and that's
all the cathedrals were being built then, but
that was to the divine feminine. It was not to.
Right, Chartres was
the Gnostic Gospels you're talking about?
Yes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the Cathars, and the Cathars were a sect of Christianity that was they had Sunday meetings, and the meetings were led by the priests, but the priests were all women. And they simply read passages out of this book, The Path of Life or The Path of Joy, that Jesus and Mary Magdalene together wrote down whatever Jesus came up with for teachings. And the Cathars were incredibly happy people, and they were incredibly prosperous. And that was their problem, was that the King of France was broke and the Pope was broke. So they collaborated. They said, let's go take all the monies the Cathars had. And they invented the institution of the Inquisition. And they invented the other institution, which was the Crusade. The Cathars were the first example of genocide by the Catholic Church. And they massacred every single one of them.
just like the most perverse distortion you could imagine of what Jesus was saying, you
Yeah.
know, just to do it in his name.
Yeah,
He was really in the scene. You know, that's how I think of him. He wasn't a Christian. He was,
yeah, we see in
he was a
the
Jewish mystic.
in the New Testament, in the Gospels, we see what the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Samaritans, but they really never talk about the Essenes, which were the most mystic of all the sects of Judaism. And that was where it appears Jesus of Nazareth and John was his cousin. They both were trained as
Right.
in the school of the Essenes over by Qumran, which is where the scrolls were discovered after World War II. So it's and a lot of women were there, you know, teaching and learning alongside. So anyway, so let's go back to, here's the rest of our
Well, we just did this kind of deep dive into, this is Richard's painting. He also practiced Buddhism, but in the branch that he was exposed to, art was really kind of discouraged because it was an expression of the self rather than a transcendence of the self. I feel it can be both. You can express the transcendence. But Bruce says that wasn't true in the lineage that he and his brother were a part of, that their master teacher encouraged creativity and expression. But that was really why Richard left Buddhism. But I thought, while we're here, before we move on,
describe the logo at least.
Okay. The logo is for the class that we came up with the name of together. I was already working with this logo myself for other stuff I was doing. And I said, well, let's get Aleph in there because it represents infinity. And it's my favorite letter. I just think it's so gorgeous. That's beautiful flame.
So it's showing Aleph, and then it says Alpha to Omega. So in the Greek alphabet starts off with the letter Alpha and ends with the letter Omega. So you go from one end to the other with Aleph. And Aleph is the lowest order infinity, as studied by Georg Cantor, the German mathematician.
And it's the end is within the beginning and the beginning is within the end. So it's not linear, it's circular. And it's a spiral. So I just felt it was so perfect for us, and it's this alchemical image, and it doesn't fit well in those little things they put online from little websites. We have to somehow come up with a way to get that to work. But Bart said, well, why don't we use talks as a play on TED Talks? So that's kind of where we're headed if we ever do end up commercializing this, that we hope to have something that will be more like TED Talks on doing Aleph talks on these kinds of concepts. And so I was just so glad. We have a huge print of this painting. I wish I could afford to buy it. I don't usually feel that way about paintings, but I was so glad that he was willing to share it with us. And so he's got a website that we have links for him here. And this is a traditional poem from one of the real
mystics.
The real recognized codified mystics of Kabbalah, which took its present form in medieval times. But it was much, much older, but it was a totally oral tradition and a real energetic transmission.
Yeah, it appears that it was around thousands of years before Jesus of Nazareth was born. But when he ended up well, first he had to flee Palestine because Herod was killing every firstborn kid. So he went to Egypt for a bit, and then Herod died, so he came back.
His birth was foretold the way the Dalai Lama's birth was foretold.
Yeah.
There are people who can, I'm an astrologer, who feel they can see these things coming.
Yeah.
You know, that this very important soul is coming in. They're going to embody a lot of principles of a given age, of a given epoch. And that's what they saw in the Star of Bethlehem. It was part of the procession of the equinox and all kinds of things that they knew.
Yeah.
And he was, I would say, an avatar, or, you know, an embodiment, a divine embodiment of that period of time.
So it appears that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was probably 14, 15, 16 years old when Jesus gave birth. And what went with it, though,
When she gave birth.
when she gave birth to Jesus, then her husband, Joseph, was much older, in his 40s or thereabouts. And he had been married before his wife had died, and now he had married Mary. Well, he was so old. Remember, the life expectancy back then is like age 40. So he actually died. And there was an uncle, though, in this family tree named Joseph of Arimathea, who was incredibly wealthy. And Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus of Nazareth and placed him into this Essene school in Qumran, where his cousin John was already. And they studied there for, you know, a number of years. And then this is where all of a sudden Jesus disappears. There's these lost years from age 12 to age 30. Well, so Jesus had learned all this stuff in the school, and he went with Joseph of Arimathea, who had his wealth from these tin mines that were in Cornwall in England. So he took Jesus to Cornwall a number of times, and then he took Jesus on his boats to other parts of where he was selling tin. Tin was used for bronze. So he took him off into India and ended up exposing him to Buddhism and to Hinduism. And
I believe he went to Tibet.
Yeah, and he went to Tibet as well. And so he spent all this time on the Silk Road, being exposed to all these other philosophies or faiths. Even it appears he was even exposed to Taoism, okay, to whatever extent. It wasn't clear he made it to China, but this is where these lost years went. So we go back now to this poem here, The Tree of Life, and we can just read the poem and you'll see what's going on.
And I have a link to this. Wikipedia has really grown. I used to work as a researcher and writer, and you know, we would be fired if we cited Wikipedia in those days. The only thing you could do was get started there and see if they had any footnotes that you could follow. But nowadays they've really come a long ways, and I thought this was a really good Wikipedia article on Isaac Luria, who's considered to be one of the fathers of contemporary Kabbalah, which has gone through several evolutions over the years. As we were saying, it was very different when it was a purely oral tradition. It started to change. It was almost like the diaspora was bringing this Gulf Stream through these other waters, and it had its own essence that it was transmitting along the way, but it was also picking up other influences as it passed through them. But it was also distributing its influence in various places, which is why there seems to be so much convergence sometimes. And travel wasn't as difficult as like you think it was. They had sailboats. They knew where the streams were, the currents were, and they could navigate with the stars. And you know, the Phoenicians were doing it a long time ago. So this is a poem just to show that there is a tradition to it. You can't just make it up off the top of your head, but there is also a lot of room for a lot of creativity and interpretation. But it's within the structure of the formality of it's like, okay, you've got to write a sonnet, but you can say whatever you want, but it has to be a sonnet. It's kind of like that. So here, you read it in your voice.
Behold, that before the emanations were emanated and the creatures were created, the upper simple light had filled the whole universe,
Wait a
the
second.
whole existence.
But so that's the top. Oh God, this is going to be a little. But that's up here. So that's the crown, which is also what the chakra is referred to in the Hindu tradition. It's the crown chakra. And they even have some of the same symbols sometimes. The heart chakra is the Star of David, you know, and that represents fire pointing up, water pointing down. There's just amazing parallels and confluences. But so there's that most supernal,
We're gonna have to.
the first
You went.
emanation. I'm going back to the poem. So
Hold on, you went past. Yeah.
I wish I could have
Let me
enlarged
just
it.
start over. Behold, that before the emanations were emanated and the creatures were created, the upper simple light had filled the whole existence, and there was no vacancy, such as an empty air, a hollow, but all was filled with that simple, boundless light, and there was no such part as head or end, but everything was one. Simple light, balanced evenly and equally, and it was called the light of Ein Sof.
And soft.
Without end, Ein Sof.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That was what I
Hold
meant
on.
to do. Okay.
Wait, we went past it. Okay, there, hold on. Yeah. And when upon his simple will came the desire to create the words and emanate the emanations, to bring to light the perfection of his deeds, his names, his appellations, which was the cause of the creation of the worlds, then the Ein Sof restricted himself in his middle point, precisely at the center, and he restricted that light and drew far off to the sides around that middle point, and there remained an empty space, an empty air, a vacuum, precisely from the middle point. And that restriction was equally around that empty middle point, so that the space was evenly circled around it. And after the restriction, when the vacant space remained empty, precisely in the middle of the light of Ein Sof, a place was formed where the emanations, creations, formations, and actions might reside. Then from the light of Ein Sof, a single line hung down from above, lowered into that space. And through that line, he emanated, created, formed, and made all the worlds. Prior to these four worlds, there was one light of Ein Sof, whose name is one, in wondrous hidden unity. And even in the angels closest to him, there is no force and no attainment in the Ein Sof, as there is no mind of a created that could attain him, for he has no place, no boundary, no name. Is there any more on the next page?
No, that's it for the poll.
Okay.
So I love that articulation of the problem of infinity. It's a problem. There's no place to be, you know, there's no place, there's no dimensionality. There's just everything is one and it's nothing. And so it's infinite potential, but it's really zero actuality. So in order to make that leap, there's like the synapse that has to be leapt from nothing to something. The Kabbalah describes it actually as a process of division and not addition. You're dividing the oneness into these kind of artificial pieces, but just so you can have some kind of activity and contemplation and consciousness. Because if it's all one, it's just, I've kind of had experiences like this. It's kind of horrible. It's a kind of hell, really. It's like that science fiction story, I have no mouth and I cannot scream.
Mhm.
That's how it feels to me when I have those moments. It's like, give me a mouth, to just, but ultimately there's nothing to say and there's nobody to tell because it is all one, and we know that, but I feel that the Jewish mystics go on from there because it's like, well, let's play, let's have some movement, let's have some experience, let's have love. And there's this job to do, which is mending the brokenness. So we have a project, we're
So that in modern cosmology, we have this notion. Initially, it was called the Big Bang, but now we believe it really was a big bounce that occurred. And one of the key things about this,
and that is what the story of Genesis is telling, and it is from a Kabbalistic perspective.
right, is the again, just to remind everybody, the 100 years ago, the telescopes were finally able to gather enough light so they could discern what they saw as little smudges were actually not smudges, but they were galaxies themselves that had tens or hundreds of millions of stars in them. But the key thing was they were all moving away from one another. And if they're all moving away from one another, then we run it backwards and they all started out at some place. Now, what happened when you go back to the start is there was a need. As you look at the sky around you, the sky appears to be relatively uniform. That is, there's kind of the same number
The
of
night
stars
sky, right.
everywhere as you look at the sky. There's not some void someplace and a gazillion stars in some other place and so forth. It appears to be all smeared out, okay? And so a classmate of mine, undergraduate classmate, proposed something which he called inflation. So if we go back to this bounce that occurred, everything is now, crunched together into some kind of really small thing, and then it bounces. Well, the space itself started to expand or inflate by 30 orders of magnitude, just an incredible inflation of everything around you. And one of the things that came out of this as a necessary mathematical consequence was that there's many universes that were created out of this bounce. So this oneness that we're talking about here in the Kabbalah is there, but within the oneness, there's universe upon universe upon universe, each of them containing billions of galaxies, and each of them containing hundreds of millions of stars and hundreds of millions of planets and so forth. So it's amazing to me how they were able to sense this.
And there's a teaching that when anybody dies, an entire universe dies with them. Their universe dies with them. I just think it's incredibly poetic and beautiful. That in a way we are a universe.
Right. Yeah. So, one of the things that's the Jewish mystics, the Kabbalists believe, though, is that everybody has a soul, and the soul is eternal. And when you die, the soul lives and it reincarnates with a new body. Now, Bruce, as a Buddhist, would, I think, agree with this, that when everyone does have a soul, and that when you die, you go off to a area where you review your past life, everything. You review everything, the pluses and the minuses, and then a decision has to be made. Should you reincarnate or should you stay where you're at? And everyone has their own path in doing this. But one of the reasons that you incarnate is that you can learn so much more so quickly by incarnating than by not. That, or at least this is what I've been led to believe.
And transmute more karma.
Right.
And with your actions. They say even the angels can't really act because they have to just follow the laws of the universe. So if there's gravity at work, that's it, you're going down. Whereas humans are said to be unique in that we don't just have the lower levels of the soul, we have the more individuated levels of the soul with free will, with all that implies and all that carries in terms of karma. So each of these sections opens into a tunnel of articles that we've gathered and prepared.
And
so these links,
the graphic that we have here, for example, you should look at this as different cycles of the universe. So there's a bounce wherever you see this contraction coming together. There's a bounce there, and then things expand for billions of years, trillions of years, and then they come back together and contract, and then they expand again and again and again, and this is the cycle of the universe.
And this is from Quantum magazine. So we always try to find some source that isn't just us. So Quantum is a really good, kind of cutting edge physics contemplation. I think it's every month. And so we always try to provide context and source materials for whatever we're saying. And so here's, actually, I'm sorry, he's from Trinidad originally, but went to school in Toronto. So that was the Canadian connection. But there's something up there. So he's written a lot about the intersection of spirituality and creativity. And beautiful paintings. We have a few prints here. And sometimes we have two framed in the house that we meditate with. And sometimes I just feel like I have to bring it with a labyrinth walk or something, and I put it on a big easel. And labyrinths, I think, are another kind of, they're really a mandala. And people say there's a Kabbalistic interpretation. I don't really know it, but I would say there probably is, because it's really an energy practice. So then this is the introduction proper to the class. Here we have a little Dante, and these are the sections that we cover. So we're kind of jumping around a little bit right now and giving the overview, and we're sending this out to other people who aren't with us tonight, but it's really nice to have some familiar and fresh faces to direct ourselves toward. So this is the outline of how it first started. But as we're saying, it's expanding every year as people bring in new things to share with us. We discover new things. We get a critique from somebody like she was the director of the Faith Formation program. She said, well, what about the Divine Feminine? And we're like, oh yeah, it's not like we meant to leave that out. So we're constantly adding. I think we added that. We have our biggest kind of catch-all is mysticism, East and West. So I think we inserted it there. But we try to have, as I said, links for everything.
Well, why don't we just go to the links on Hildegard that you already had?
Well, because I think I wanted to give a little more context first.
Okay.
Now this is a guy. There's the tree of life as it is depicted usually in Kabbalah, and
so you see there's 10
the 10
nodes there, 10
Sephirot.
Sephirot.
And there's just so many parallels, and that we keep finding more
Well,
people. This
Ex-
guy,
explain
Phillips,
what the other things are.
is doing all kinds of things. A lot of the Jewish tradition is very averse to any kind of depiction, because that's a reduction of the infinite. So it's a lot of times there aren't a lot of representations of the concepts, even though they're helpful. But it's like trying to show, at least 3 or 10 dimensions in 2 dimensions, and they feel like there's no point anyway. But so this is from, what is his first name? Phillips?
Stephen Phillips.
Stephen Phillips.
Yeah.
And he actually went out of his way to travel from England to work with Ron, with Bruce's brother, and share some of the intersectionality of the physics and the Kabbalah. That he's not from a traditional Jewish background, he's from more of an English esoteric background, which is another offshoot that the Kabbalah took. And one is actually very Christian mysticism. That's Kabbalah with a C. And Kabbalah with a Q is the Western esoteric tradition. And Kabbalah with a K and the 2 B's is the more traditional, real Hebrew tradition. But it's thought that they might have really cross-pollinated. So this is a yantra from Hinduism.
Yeah, let me just pick up, since you're talking about what Ron, so forth. There was.
I talk about what.
Yeah, we'll come back to this in a second. I don't want to grab this while it's still fresh. So
we want to say everything at the same time.
Yeah, there were 2 individuals, Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater, and they collaborated in the 1890s, going on up into the 1920s, and they wrote a book called Occult Chemistry.
Occult chemistry.
Yeah, which was, of course, trashed by Western science. But anyway, they carried out in it a series of observations that they made under deep meditation for the structure of the different elements that make up the periodic table. And they made drawings. They're not instrumenting anything. They made drawings by hand of what they saw. And so go back to the Zoom. Get this.
I wanted to get something else. I wanted to get some of those images.
Oh, you're gonna have to leave screen share.
Right. I was gonna go to this. Why don't you do it more smoothly?
Okay.
I was gonna go to the resources page. We have wonderful resources.
Yeah. So they made all these observations. So Stephen Phillips is a theoretical physicist in England, and he discovered this book in the late 1970s, that sort of time frame, and he started to go through it and see, like how much of this is really true. And he carried out a whole bunch of he went through everything page by page, and there were a couple of errors that they made in observations, but that would be under 1% of these things didn't match what the current state of the periodic table shows and other things related to this.
They were anticipating the discoveries.
They
by decades.
Yeah, there were elements they were predicting, and there was something called an isotope. So an isotope is where I have an atom, and the atom has a certain number of electrons, has the same number of protons in its nucleus, and a certain number of neutrons. And every so often what happens is one of the neutrons splits into a proton and an electron. And so therefore now the nucleus has one more proton than it did before. So this creates a different element than what we just had, or equivalently, the number of neutrons is different. We've lost one of the neutrons, and this leads to what are called isotopes. So an example is for hydrogen, has one electron and one proton. That's the simplest possible. There's deuterium, which has one electron, one proton, and one neutron. So it has one extra thing in the nucleus. And then there's tritium, which is, again, one electron, one proton, and two neutrons. So there's three things in the nucleus, okay? And they saw all these, okay? So Ron Cowan was he reached out to Stephen Phillips because Stephen Phillips had written a paper saying, my God, look at what these people did at the turn of the century. And they were way ahead of anything that people did for decades. And Ron reached out to Stephen and said, well, Stephen, I've been able to confirm these observations. In fact, I think I can go beyond their observations, which he indeed did, okay? And so that led to Stephen Phillips coming and visiting both Bruce and Ron, and Stephen carried out a variety of tests to make sure that Ron was not pulling his leg, that it wasn't all hokum, and then the rest was history. Now, one of the things that he did, let's go back up here.
And he has a wonderful website.
Yeah, the website is loaded with stuff.
You can
Now we're
spend
going to go back to the figure.
years studying that website.
The figure. This was the tree of life here. This is the Sri Rantra from Hinduism. This is the I Ching over here from China. Down here, we have some Platonic solids. So this, for example, is a pyramid made up of 4 tetrahedrons on the top and 4 on the bottom. So there's a square that is running around the edge, connecting the up and the bottom pyramid here. This one is just, again, equilateral triangles, but there's just 4 faces, 1, 2, 3, and then there's one behind this. So there's 4 faces for this tetrahedron that's here. This is a square that a cube that has 6 squares on its faces, and so forth. And so that's all of these Platonic solids. And finally, we come to this thing over here. This is an abstraction of something called a Calabi-Yau manifold. An Italian mathematician named Calabi proposed that these would exist and had some properties, but he never proved it. So Yau in 1979 proved that these things exist.
And he's Chinese?
Yau, yeah, Xingtong Yau. And he's very much Chinese. In fact, Yau, when he was first working on this, with what Calabi had done, his initial inclination was to prove that they don't exist. And as he went through the logic of his proof, he realized that he was completely dead wrong, and it was the other way around. So he then published his proof that they existed, and he received for this what's called the Fields Medal. The Fields Medal is the Nobel Prize in mathematics. So this is not a trivial proof that you can do in ding-dong school. This is a pretty high-powered thing. And these Calabi-Yau manifolds are critical to the structure of the universe, to all of these different things here. And what we have in the middle that Phillips put in is...
This is from his website.
Yeah,
This
it's
is
from his website. This is a set of 10 closed strings. People have heard of something called string theory, which was proposed in the 1960s, saying that everything is in fact a string, and the strings encompass, or they resonate, and by resonating they attract energy inside them. So if we resonate this set of strings here, we get energy inside, but the energy is by the nature of things, you should think of it more as a jelly. Okay, so it's just a jelly that's sitting inside, resonating and jiggling all over the place. And that makes up a lot of these subatomic particles, okay? and is the center of everything. This is the theory to end all theories that will describe, you know, everything that's going on. We'll come back to this. They're the sacred geometries, as you can see. This is a modern geometry. This Calabi-Yau manifold is critical for describing these strings here,
which
and
are interdimensional.
they exist in these particular strings. I said there's 10 closed strings here. They actually are in a 10-dimensional subspace, but there's only 4 dimensions that we need to worry about, 3 for space and 1 for time. The other 6 are what are called compactified dimensions. They're rolled up. They're very hard to see, like very hard. And no one's built any instruments to date to be able to see these dimensions, but they all believe these dimensions are there, and they're described by these Calabi-Yau manifolds.
We have some really good images.
Yeah. So we'll come back to this. Now we want to just get out of this, and I'm going to go back to our. We want to go
to the resources page a bit, okay?
Yeah, hold on. Resources. Here. Okay, here we go.
We're very lucky to have very generous web hosting, because this is just so heavy.
Okay, so
But
this is,
the amount
see,
of
here's
content.
again, this is our Aleph Talks website. So here's our homepage, and one of the tabs here, we were dealing with the modules tab. So we're going through the syllabus. We've just flipped over to the next tab, which is resources. Okay, so there's 3 sets of resources that we have. We have 3 columns of resources. There's some pictures here in this first column. There's a lot of the lectures in the second column, and then there's supplementary backup material in the third column.
So there's
over here.
Andy Besant and
Yeah,
Leadbeater. They were Theosophists, which was really kind of founded by Blavatsky.
right. So here's a woman, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. You can see, we'll just.
So we do have a unit for that.
I think there's a picture of her. Yeah, there's a picture of her up here, so you can see her.
She was intense.
Very intense, very intense. Okay, now how do I back out of this? Having got here. Don't tell me I can't.
You need a back tab.
Yeah, where is it? I guess, let me just go back here. Maybe, oh, I should,
I think if you just close it.
yeah, close it.
Yeah.
Now we go back. Sorry.
No, keep going on the resources page.
No, I am. I'm going to back there right here.
Okay.
Okay. So here you see this discussion of Charles Leadbeater and Annie Besant, and Madame Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society.
There's a really good image of a Calabi-Yau manifold.
Yeah, this is a
That's
two-dimensional picture of a 6-dimensional Calabi-Yau manifold. Now you have to imagine that this thing is morphing. It's rotating and it's morphing and changing. Okay.
There is, we have an animation.
These are dimensions around us.
Here's some
okay?
more.
And this is even more bizarre. This one.
Okay, so here's the.
Okay, click on that. I think the animation. Go to the video. Pretty sure it'll work. Here we go. Okay, now watch this. This is an animated Calabi-Yau manifold.
It's so hard to depict something this complicated in 2 planes, you know. But we think they've done a pretty good job.
But if you could imagine, this is the structure of the space around us. These are hidden dimensions. So these are really tiny dimensions that we can't see, but they're morphing this way.
And it seems to be how creation happens.
Yeah.
Is how they unfold. And that's what the Kabbalah is describing. in really beautiful metaphorical terms, because there's no other way to express it. It's so abstract and it's so beyond our way of thinking in 3 dimensions and,
Well, you have
and
to,
time,
yeah.
which doesn't even really exist.
Yeah, you have to go to more dimensions. Okay, hit the X over here. Just hit this X and let's see what happens.
This one,
This one.
that one.
There we go.
So, and then we have some really exquisite. We've spent a weekend. This is our idea of a good time. We spent a weekend creating these 2 diagrams. It was snowing or something, right? We
Yeah.
were like kind of,
Yeah.
housebound or raining, and so
Yeah, this is what we think. We have a 26-dimensional universe.
and that's not Bart's idea. That's
Yeah, there's other people that came up with this. There's a certain structure that I put together, and Ron Cowan confirmed this.
and this is how they could be folded up. This is a way to again visualize something that's really difficult for us to visualize the way
Well,
we're
we'll come back to this. It's
hardwired.
yeah.
But I wanted to give an example of, so
Here's an electron
that's
that Ron Cowan
that
observed.
Ron's drawing.
These are his drawings. You can see them, and what he is stop there. Go back.
Okay, I just wanted to show we're going somewhere with that.
Yeah, that inside now Ron stopped this, but this thing is jiggling or vibrating like crazy, like all electrons are, and so inside these 10 closed strings is all of this energy, which is now resonating, and it's caught up inside. But the nature of the resonance is, again, you should think of this as a jelly, but it forms a torus or a donut. Okay, there's a hole through the middle of the electron, which you can see there. And looking down on it and so forth. The strings are running around the edge, and there's a hole through the middle of the electron, and then the electron with the strings there is covered with what are Ron called information blocks. So these are things that contain algorithms and data, and they're constantly scanning and waiting for a response for the universe around us. So this electron, if it senses another electron or another proton or whatever is doing something, has changed in its position, whatever, it will then detect this by scanning and get a response, and then it will go to the algorithms and look up to see, okay, now since it did that, I have to do this. So for example, since an electron has a negative charge and a proton has a positive charge, the two attract one another. Opposites attract. The same, if they're both negative, they repel. If they're both positive, they repel. So the electron could say, oh, the proton's getting closer to me. I should move closer to the proton because I'm attracted to it. That's what the algorithm says. And so it goes. So this is a hint as to how the universe works.
We like to talk about that movie, The Matrix, in this part. That it's just all kind of like that.
That was one of the exciting things that Ron talked to me about, is that he was observing an electron traveling through space, and all of a sudden it disappeared and then reappeared a bit further along. And he basically observed that in that brief time, it expanded infinitely. Right. And then it came back together again. And it had this, it recorded the information in these blocks. And he was very excited about that discovery.
Yeah, it's a really fundamental observation. This is a Nobel Prize level observation. So here's some examples, though. This is what Ron made pictures of, but here's what Besant and Leadbeater made pictures of. So here's their pictures of 10 closed strings, and Ron confirmed that. And here's another individual called Babbitt in the 1880s, and he came up with this sort of picture, again, under deep meditation. So there's no instruments, there's no anything. They're simply meditating and zeroing in right down at the nuclear level, subatomic level, and seeing these things. And you have to remember, they're not only seeing these things, they're stopping them from moving, because like I said, they're vibrating all over the place at incredible speeds.
I wanted to find his beautiful paintings of the chakras, aren't they? Here we go. These are so.
Well, this is
That's one of his paintings.
Yeah, this is Ron's book that you can buy on Amazon called The Path of Love. Let's see, the future of Buddhism as a science. So Ron has in this book, he has made observations of each of the 7 chakras. The picture on the cover that's in color is the crown chakra. And this appears to be what's called dark matter. So dark matter is not matter as we know it. It actually is in a different subspace. It's right next to us physically, but it's in a different subspace. So that's why we don't see it. And Ron has pictures of all 7 chakras. This is the only color picture.
They're just so beautiful. This is a fantasy of Bart's. It's to have the glass artist make a chandelier for the Unitarian Church. That's a Calabi-Yau manifold.
Yeah.
So
this is, you should go to the website for Dale Chihuly and see the sort of glass works that he does. It's truly, I think it's amazing. So
this is where the tree of life comes from, this pattern, which is just
this
about
is the flower of life.
Universal. Yeah. So we have, a wealth of the imagery to show the relationships and the history. And they were obviously, you could say, connected to the collective unconscious, as Jung would describe it, but they were also cross-pollinating. They were also traveling and sharing their ideas and their experiences and practicing together. And I would say kind of celebrating the differences instead of killing each other over the differences. Sure. They're just different models, but so much is the same.
Right. For example, we touched on this with this picture right here showing these blocks of information that are scanning all the time. And that's Jung's collective unconsciousness, that those information blocks aren't simply on the surface of every electron or every proton or neutron. They're on the surface of every compartment of space. So space itself is quantized, and space, when you get down,
and it seems to be intelligent,
even smaller than the nucleus, you get down to where space itself is made up of compartments. Wow. And the compartments are covered with these blocks of information. And so the space itself is always scanning, trying to see what's going on. What do I do? And the particles we're talking about hop from space compartment to space compartment. That's how you move through space. You go hop, hop, hop.
And we have a wonderful film on the double slit experiment, which we looked at.
Yeah, we looked at it last time.
Again, last time. Where's that? Is that?
Yeah,
is that in the middle column?
Yeah, it's like there.
A primary source. A double slit.
Or is it maybe we put it.
Column?
I thought we put it here.
We should have, but we've shown that a few times.
We'll find it. Yeah,
you see different things every time you watch it, I think. But it's about this, the mystery of it, and I just think it's inherently spiritual. I don't see it right here.
No, I don't see it. It could very well be here, but we'll go look for it and see. Make it easier to find.
But these are physicists they're like, you know, standard Western educated physicists, but they're talking about the electron scanning. And that the scans that seem to, it's like the consciousness of the electron is changing what's going on in this experiment, of whether it's going to behave like a particle or a wave. And
Yeah.
it seems to be both. It depends on the situation. Which
Whether
sounds
there's one
totally
slit or
crazy.
two slits, or
Right.
whether it's being looked at or not.
So
and-
when we send this out, we'll add that as
Yeah.
a link.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the mysteries that this led. There's a really great physicist, David Bohm, Bohm, and in the 1960s he realized that physics couldn't explain this, and he said maybe there's what he called a pilot wave, or there's some other wave out there that we can't see that's actually coordinating all of these different things. And in fact, he developed a whole theory of quantum mechanics with his pilot wave in it, and it makes all the same predictions as any other theory of quantum mechanics, but ends up involving this pilot wave. So everything is controlled. And here Ron came across this control mechanism of this information scan, response, that Bohm had postulated. And there was an earlier physicist, Louis de Broglie, who received the Nobel Prize in the 1920s for his work in quantum mechanics. And he thought that this was how things worked also. They just didn't have any way to go show it. In fact, modern Western physics still can't show this. So anyway, that's where we're at.
So we found this wonderful book when we were first getting together. That's a compilation of correspondence between Carl Jung and another physicist. He met Einstein several times, and you know, they had a lot of respect for each other. But then he ended up working more deeply with a younger man who actually kind of revised some of Einstein's theories. And Einstein had a lot of respect for him as a younger man. And his name is Wolfgang Pauli. And so their correspondence about ultimately it's really a contemplation of synchronicity. And that is sort of what inspired us to do the class. We had both read the Tao of Physics decades ago, and the book on the precession of the equinoxes and the ages.
Hamlet's Mill.
That's called Hamlet's Mill. One of the authors of that was at MIT for many years. And what was the other one?
The Tao of Physics was written by, again, a European Western science physicist who argued that they've hit a dead end in physics and they should look to the East, to the Tao, for new ideas. And that's what David Bohm did. David Bohm spent a lot of time with Hindu mystics and monks, trying to understand what they saw in deep meditation, because he said we need fresh ideas. We can't get anywhere in physics just plodding away the way we are. David Bohm's reward for doing this was he was blackballed by the physicists and ended up moving to Brazil so he could still be a physicist. But you know, he was truly a great physicist. And so here what we see with Jung and Pauli got the Nobel Prize because he discovered what's called the neutrino. He is a theoretician, and what the neutrino came about because people took neutrons and they were able to isolate the neutrons and they noticed that after, say, 5 or 10 minutes, the neutron would spontaneously decay into a proton and an electron. But there was a little bit of mass that was missing. And they looked at the neutron and the mass of the electron and the mass of the proton. They were short a little bit of mass. And so Pauli said, oh, well, that's a little neutron. We'll call it a neutrino. And that was the missing mass, okay? So for that, he received the Nobel Prize. That has been confirmed many times. And the force that causes this to happen, this is what creates isotopes in the nuclei of atoms. This is called the weak force. And Pauli this is typical of his contributions. So Pauli and Jung had a huge correspondence here, as you can
It's a
see.
beautiful book with a lot of beautiful diagrams and visuals that they put together. And
But they're very different people. Pauli went to Jung because Pauli said, look, I'm a physicist and I can't explain this stuff and I need a fresh view. And you, Jung, look at things very differently than other people. So if you learn enough physics and I learn enough of what you're doing, and I'll call it metaphysics, maybe we'll get somewhere. And they did this from what, 1930 to 1957. They had 89 letters. Pauli loved letters. He didn't write that many papers, but he loved letters. And this is what he did with Jung.
so we would like this to be the heart of the class. We've found that people just, during the pandemic anyway, for some reason, people just didn't want to focus on reading. So but we really want to encourage people to read this book so that we can discuss it all on a different level. And I came to astrology really as a Jungian. Initially I was a skeptic. It's kind of like the story of the guy that set out to disprove. There was a statistician who set out to disprove astrology and ended up forming a new school of thought of astrology. And his name is Gauquelin. For me, it was kind of like that. But I just thought, well, so many brilliant people think there's something there. Who am I to say? So I just kept studying and studying until I could see why they were saying what they were saying about the patterns. That's what it's really about. And so that led me to a deeper reading of Jung and synchronicity. And that's how I've understood astrology to function for about 30 years. But now doing this work with Bart, I'm getting a different understanding of synchronicity and causality. Normally, synchronicity is described as an acausal connecting principle. But the problem is really, it's just that our notion of causality is so limited. The causality is far more complex and less, one-dimensional and linear than we think of.
Yeah,
So
there's actually 2 time dimensions. That's the tip off. So, but here's an example of, Jung and Pauli interacted for decades, okay? And so here's the test.
And Jung was old enough to be his father.
Right. Yeah, Jung was born in 1875. Pauli was born in 1900. So the test is this. Who said this? As the phenomenal world is an aggregate of the processes of atomic magnitude, it's naturally of the greatest importance to find out whether, and if so, how, the photons, shall we say, enable us to gain a definite knowledge of the reality underlying the mediative energy processes. Light and matter both behave like separate particles and also like waves. This obliged us to abandon on the plane of atomic magnitudes a causal description of nature in the ordinary space-time system, and in its place to set up invisible fields of probability in multidimensional spaces. So you'd say, well, Pauli said that. No, Jung said that, okay? And then if we go over here to the other one, hold on, let me get this out of the way. Who said division and reduction of symmetry, this then the kernel of the brute. The former is an ancient attribute of the devil. If only the two divine contenders, Christ and the devil, could notice that they have grown so much more symmetrical. So Jung said this? Nope, Pauli said this. Okay. So you can see the impact that each one had on the other. And both of them had incredibly powerful intellects. And this is why, you know, if they find this interesting, we should try and understand what they think, why this is so interesting.
But I think they also were seeing a lot of the same things.
Yeah.
From a simplistically speaking, opposing perspective. We started out to create the class as a debate, but we kept agreeing too much. It was too artificial. We just couldn't maintain the opposition. We'd end up laughing. So to me, they're like these kind of archetypal, larger than life version of us and our dialectic over the last few years, which really was kind of a way to get to know each other during the pandemic when there was nothing to go out and do. We kind of stayed home and played with this. And we've been delighted to find anybody that's at all interested and has their own, it's like a multifaceted jewel, their own perspective of things that they've been questioning and contemplating. And people have, various backgrounds, and we had a mother and daughter. The mother was very steeped in Edgar Cayce, and the daughter was very familiar with Steiner school.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner.
Rudolf Steiner. She actually homeschooled her children in the Steiner method. It's similar to Montessori. That's not what Montessori comes out of, right?
No, Montessori comes from Maria Montessori.
From Montessori. But so these are all images of bronze, which we think are beautiful. We can see that they're beautiful.
Yeah, Ron was a very good artist, but you have to understand this. It's more than, if I took the electron as an example, I kept saying it's jittering, it's vibrating all over the place. So he's not only able to find the electron, he's able to stop it from vibrating so that he can actually make those sketches. So there's an element not simply of meditation, but that he's able to
freeze frame.
Yeah, to be able to control it, to exert a force on it so that it doesn't go jittering all over the place. So he can do the pictures that we just saw.
I think that's really how shamans work. When they're looking at some malaria, organism, they're using this amazing microscope to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the underlying. I've just been getting into viruses lately. They're so psychedelic. They're just amazing technologies. If you look at them, I'm getting more and more interested in animation and how we can.
Yeah, that's what we should do now.
Okay, so we'll close with that.
Yeah.
But Bruce, we're kind of playing with the idea. It might be interesting to see if we found a really good animation artist, that somebody could turn some of these into animations.
Well, we actually have found some incredible animation people. They're in Lvov in the Ukraine.
Right.
And they're very cost effective.
And so then we've just been, as I said, when I was sick, I was poking around. So let's see how much time we have. I'll just do a quick gloss for background and zero in on the last one. So how do I do another share screen?
You're still in share screen.
Okay, so can you see these images with all the blue?
This is an email.
Okay.
You,
Should we blow it up?
No, I mean, just a link.
So something I've been contemplating a lot lately is this concept of Hildegard's called viriditas. You see it spelled in different ways.
But it's greenness. It's Latin for greenness.
You see it spelled VERD as
Uh,
well.
yeah.
I'll just click on these quickly. So this is out of some kind of a Catholic order. And I think they get into trouble with their saints, because it's just like, well, what incarnation is going on with them? They're seeing such different things. But they do really love Hildegard. So here they're talking about Veritas. There's the dryness and it means like alive with greenness, alive with life. And it's vivified, maybe is another word. It has this incredible sense of energy and life and growth, verdancy, that it turns out she did not invent it, but she became very, very focused on it. But it was something kind of going on in the culture of talking about this principle, and she just became completely enamored of it. And it's this wonderful mystical understanding of the divine that's completely beyond personification. And that's something I really like about Judaism, is that they're so averse to the idea of any kind of reduction of the infinite divine to human terms. That's just a projection of our ego. It's not an understanding of the infinite and the miraculous divinity of it. So this is a way of thinking of that coming into form. Because remember the poem that we started with, it's so abstract, the oneness. It's just this big nothing, this big void of potential. But as soon as you start separating that oneness, the unity, it's an act of division that creates the actual from the potential. You start with an archetype of a chair, but then you have to decide, is it going to be a rocking chair? Is it going to be a ladder back chair? Is it going to be an easy chair? Is it going to recline or not? You're narrowing it down to distinct actualities out of all the possibilities. And I think that's something that I used to feel very inhibited about when I tried to do anything creative, because it's a commitment to one particular thing. You have to have one chair to have any chair, and you can't have all the chairs. So this idea of this greenness, I think, is a really wonderful alternative to a personification of the divine. That is this principle of life. And
I think you can close this by just hitting this thing up here.
okay, will that take me back to that like index?
Yeah.
So just using this as a kind of spine to go down. Well, this is the kind of thing we're going to fill in later. This is kind of a teaser of the outline. So this is from a Catholic site talking about this principle of veritas. It also happens to be the name of the organization that I learned about the labyrinth from, that I got my training from. The woman who's
Lauren Archers.
right. I believe she's some kind of an Episcopal bishop, something like that.
In San
Or
Francisco.
cardinal, I think.
Yeah.
At the San Francisco Cathedral. And so her organization is named Veritas, and she's a big lover of Hildegard. So I can hardly see this, even with it all blown up. Do you want to read this?
O most honored greening force, you who roots in the sun, you who lights up in shining serenity within a wheel that earthly excellence fails to comprehend. You are enfolded in the weaving of divine mysteries. You redden like the dawn, and you burn flame of the sun. Now, you have to understand, Hildegard, when she was around 40 years old, started to get hit with these sessions, where she was bombarded and she just started to what I just gave you was an example of something that she channeled, that she ended up writing down. But just as a different example, so you'd understand, she's the most recorded artist out of the Middle Ages, that she created chants, hours and hours of chants that are incredible, I think, and they're on YouTube, that some of these great vocalists took it upon themselves to do them, and no one knew, was there any market at all for medieval chants by women? And it turns out there's a huge market for it. This is a different one.
This is a
Yeah,
version
yeah,
of
here,
it.
here we go. Let's do this. This is some instrumentalists.
Can't hear anything.
We can't.
No.
That happens with, we have to find out why.
Okay, that happens with YouTube. You just stop it.
Oh,
We think it might be some kind of a copyright issue.
Yeah,
But you're supposed to be able to use things for education, which is what we're doing.
yeah. YouTube has these funny quirks that.
Well, we're sorry. We'll send
Yeah.
out the links. And it's really worth perusing and listening to on your own. Well, then we're not going to be able to share the last one either, most likely. Well, we'll see.
Good, close that.
So I just discovered this website looking up material actually on the dialogue between Jung and Pali. And I found this wonderful eccentric esoteric woman who has a website. She used to write a lot for the Times, but she's a very published scholar and writer, and her site is called The Marginalian. And so she's fascinated by Jung and Pali. She's written
Just go
several
back
essays.
up to the title so they can see. This is The Evolution of Life on Earth and the Birth of Ecology. Joan as policewoman sings Emily Dickinson. Okay, so that's what you're going to see here.
And this is really worth looking at, this whole page, which we'll send you. And here's Emily Dickinson, who's, I think, really kind of one of the ultimate mystics of the Unitarian tradition. And she grew up in Amherst with, Emerson was friends with her father, and they were all there. And this is from her herbarium. These are pressed flowers, and they've just been digitized a couple of years ago, and they're in which museum is it in Boston?
Yeah, someplace in Boston.
They're in a museum in Boston. Yeah. The originals, and
but she collected the flowers.
She actually collected and pressed all of those flowers, and it's like a respectable work of science, because the categorization is so sophisticated, the way she arranged things, and it's an exquisite work of art. So now that these images are digitized, this woman working with the woman who curates this was able to turn them into the images into elements that could be animated.
And then they were put to music as well.
And then they were put to.
So let's see if you can hear this. Let's give this a
musical interpretation of this poem by Emily. So it's being sung by this artist that I'm now all over. And it's an animation of her herbarium, of her pressed flowers, which biologists and people say is a respectable work of science for its time. She was 14 years old when she compiled it. And she's got so many good examples. And I think it's really in the way she structured it and the way she sorted the categories that makes it such good science. But it's definitely also a work of art. So that's right where we like to hang. Can you hear this?
Can you hear this? No?
No cello music?
Not really.
It's resolved to be a flower and casual
Can you hear this?
on
No.
Very
Not
choppy.
really.
Very
Okay.
choppy.
Maybe if we plug this in.
Can you hear this?
the system in the
Not very well. No, I don't hear anything.
Can you hear this? No?
Kind of.
I want to start I didn't know whether to show you the lyrics of the poem, but I want you to see the animation. That's the handwriting.
Is resolved to be a flower and casually placed would cause one scarcely to suspect the minor circumstance. The system in the
Sound is off and on.
the just thing, the skin, the ground, like this. Great nation. To disappoint. Oh, great that day. To me. It's without.
We really can't hear it. Unfortunately.
So there are other people working where we are. It's so nice to see and doing a wonderful, brilliant job.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us
Yep.
now?
Yeah,
I
okay.
can hear you, yeah.
So we'll have to work out that glitch of the sound. It's happening more and more. I think it's something that they're doing to protect copyrights or something like that. But to me, that was just such a beautiful evocation of Veritas and the green hand. And something I try to share with people. My background was, if anything, Unitarian, but really they consider themselves to be atheists. My parents both came from science backgrounds, physics, and then switched to English at different points in their careers at Brooklyn College. So I was really influenced by that and in some ways wounded by it. And always longing for, I didn't know for a long time, for the mysticism, for the unity and just the contemplation of the unity and the beauty and the miracle. So for me, it's a kind of salvation to find an expression of it that isn't idolatry. We're not saying, well, God is this man that says, if you do this on Friday night and you don't do that, you're going to go to hell. And, if you marry this person, if you love somebody of the same sex, forget it. If you eat, the wrong thing on the wrong day. But it's this unity and it's this fecundity, it's this liveliness and generosity and the love in that. And this is just this creator gone mad. We could have just one kind of flower. That would suffice. We have a million kinds of flowers. And if you read these blog entries, which we will go into in depth, it's just this incredible contemplation of how life was even engendered on the planet. Because until there were flowers, it was so hard to generate. And then that got the birds and the bees involved and helping in the pollination. And so the beauty seems to be part of it, that's what attracts the bee to the flower, which is this gorgeous mandala. And they do the pollination as they're pursuing their own purpose. And that makes it inevitable. It's not only possible, it becomes inevitable. And it seems to have something to do with the multiplicity and the beauty. It is just kind of built in. It's not an add-on. It's part of what makes it all happen. And the way they write this is really eloquent, and I'm just babbling on. But I just loved seeing that hand. And I always say, to me, to say that God is nature is a really fundamental error. Because as miraculous and divine and infinite as nature is, there's something else more mysterious than that. And so I came across this. I've been looking for it this week. I can't find it. I didn't make it up. But that God is the invisible hand inside the glove that's hidden in the glove. And nature is the glove. So in the same way that when we see the branches on the trees swaying in the breeze, they're not doing that by themselves. The wind is moving them, which we can't see. It's invisible. But we have some concept of causality there, of this wind moving things. And so I just love this image of this, what I think of as the invisible hand of nature, that's behind the glove, which is in all the multiplicity of this, this creation process gone mad. In Kabbalistic metaphor, there's no separation from the creation and the creator. So it's not like there's a puppet maker making the puppet in some shop somewhere on a cloud. It's all unfolding out of itself. And that's the unity and the multiplicity.
Right. You want to wrap it up?
So we'll send this out. It's kind of rough, but this will become a more formal presentation down the line where we're talking about the divine feminine. And as I said, I'm hoping that we can interweave it so it's not a distinct unit the way we did it the first year, which was better than not doing it at all. But we're in this evolutionary process, and
yeah,
I think this will be the next step. So you're getting a little preview in our summary of the way we've been doing it for the past few years. And there's a beautiful tabby cat.
Okay.
So we're open to questions, comments. We're glad you're still here, still awake.
Yeah, Bruce, what about the female side of Buddhism? There are, for example, are women able to become monks?
Well, in terms of awakening, it applies to both male and female.
Right.
My meditation teacher often mentioned that in terms of realization, it's easier for a woman than a man. So I never did figure that one out, not being a woman, I guess. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
And you incarnate, as women as well as men, same soul. So
that's
you know,
right.
it's
Yeah.
the problem.
You got it.
I've read that you have to come in a lot of times as a guy before you get to be a woman.
All right, dear. Yes, dear.
Isn't that right, dear?
Okay, want to wrap it up then?
So we're thinking that this kind of animation, this was done out of the scans of the actual flowers. And so this artist took these Photoshop images and morphs them into these shapes to make butterflies and all of that out of the original photographs from the original actual diary, like that, is thank goodness it's preserved up in Boston. So I was thinking maybe there'd be some way to do something like that. So that's what they look like on their own. And I love even just the way she arranged them. It's so beautiful. So we're thinking that maybe we could do something like that with some of Bruce's images, some of Ron's images, Bruce,
Mhm.
that we'd like to
Sure.
see if this group in Ukraine might be able to do something like this with it, and then finding the right kind of music and maybe words of Ron's or something else. Well, that's where we're kind of headed. We're trying to we're following the structure that we created initially, but it's always evolving and expanding. So this is all rough stuff from my retreat this week. And another unit could be Matthew Fox, who just adored Hildegard, wrote a lot of very profound stuff about her. And he got in a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church for talking about the divine feminine. He was excommunicated because he wouldn't stop saying she. And so then he became an Episcopal priest. But he's quite a character. And at one point I studied with a group of his in New York, and that was very interesting. But again, the mystics, they have their own flavor, and the things that they're saying are unique and beautiful, and it's important what they are, but they're also saying so much of the same thing in all of the traditions. So that's kind of a part of our endeavors to show the unity of the traditions. And each one is like a special flower in its own uniqueness, but the things that they have in common are about growth and beauty and love and how we could be possibly killing each other over these things is just like beyond the beyond. But we want to bring that out, to bring out what is universal, what is unique in a beautiful way. It's part of the spectrum. It's part of the jewel that we're looking at it through, and it's all poetry. How can you kill each other over the poetry? So that's part of our mission, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, we'll close with this wonderful quote. When the crusade was going in to this one city of 30,000 population that contained both Cathars and Christians, one of the soldiers asked the general, "How do I tell the difference between a Christian and a Cathar?" And the general said, "Oh, no problem. Just kill them all. God will sort it out." And so it goes.
there's efficiency.
Yeah.
So could we have anything?
No,
How do I get back to if I wanted to get back to the resources page quickly, can I do that?
close. Do the stop share. And now go down to the Chrome, go to Chrome. And go to resources,
There it is.
and now go back to
And
Zoom,
Zoom and go back to screen sharing.
and go back to screen share.
Okay.
Now share this, yeah.
So we hope you'll have a chance to poke around in here. And, you know, speaking of multiplicity, just if you have some time, just kind of browse through the modules. So there's Bruce's beautiful book cover. And then we have an overview. And each of these has links. And we usually try to set up a pretty organized PowerPoint of what we're talking about. And then that PowerPoint has links that go off in different directions. So you know, there is some method to the madness. And it kind of builds, there's a sequence to it, which we just kind of took out of order. But right now there's 10 units, which are all expanding like the universe.
Yep.
So this is the home
Okay.
page with Richard's image, and here we are. My eyes were still really bad then. I think you can see it. You can see I'm not really focused on anything. But we have sections on science.
And that's got all the videos. That's gonna just skip
Okay,
over. It takes a while for this thing to load.
Tons of videos.
Yeah.
It's nice because we're finding these authorities that aren't us. And I just felt really vindicated by these women artists that I just shared that are, you know, have been contemplating the same kind of things of Hildegard and Emily Dickinson and Yeoman Pally. You know, you don't meet that kind of thing every day. So I have a section on archetypal astrology, and there's different articles in here, like Mercury retrograde. Some of these are old, some of these are new. So it's just all kind of a hodgepodge of creativity. That's
A mind-blowing amount of information, but it's great. Thank you for starting us down the path.
someday we're gonna have to, I think it could probably be 10 more sections than it is, just to structure it a little bit more. So that you can really see there is a thesis growing there, but it's fun to share it with somebody new.
It's
And,
interesting because a lot of this stuff is like in different pieces of my life and on my bookshelf, and interesting to see how you're putting it all together.
oh, wonderful. Well, we'd like to hear more about what's on your bookshelf and what you're doing and how you're putting it all together.
It's nice to
So-
meet you. Thank you. Look forward to.
So did you find out about us through the Unitarian Church, or are you with, okay. But you just mentioned, the rabbi that came and spoke on Sunday, Bart was there. Is that what you were talking about? You mentioned something that the rabbi was saying.
Mhm.
Oh, I was wondering what the context was. Okay, I missed that. I was in the hospital. But yeah, from my perspective, it's all incredibly rich and beautiful. And I like the fact that Alan is our new minister, Bruce, that he's bringing in Judaism and finding a way to work with it. That I think our former minister was afraid it wouldn't be authentic. And I think it's important to try to do that. But I think it's important to also embrace it all and explore it all. And I love what he did with Rosh Hashanah. That's a really important kind of tradition. And why just limit ourselves to quote unquote post-Christian? We're everything and nothing, and
Well, Westport is 30% Jewish, so it has three synagogues for a town of 26,000.
and some of them are very, very liberal. You know, they had Martin Luther King came to Temple Israel next door to the church. He didn't come to us. He went to them. They have a huge building where they could fit, you know, like 1,000 people in the audience. But so we're having fun, and
Let's let them go to bed.
we've got
Let's
to
call it a
crash.
night.
So
Okay,
thank you for being with us, and we're looking forward to learning more about where you're coming from and what this all means to you. We thought for a long time, we thought we might just be the only two people doing this, but we would still do it. So for us, it's a treat when anybody else shows up. So, but we know that everybody else has their own rich paths that they've been walking as well. So it's
Take
fun
care.
when it all
Thank
comes
you.
together. So thank you for being with us. I'm reading the wrong way.
I'm gonna get the hook out. Here we go.
It's only 9:06.
It's plenty of time. They've been more than nice enough. 90-90, we'll see you next week.
We'll hear more from you.
I'll see you the week after. Next week I'll be in the mountains.
Okay.
Good for